Daily news and analysis. We keep you informed and inspired.
This is World Today.
Hello and welcome to the panel discussion of World Today. I'm Ding Heng in Beijing. China became the world's factory by leveraging its labor cost advantages, with apparel, furniture, and home appliances serving as the iconic O3 of Chinese exports. Later on, China's export portfolio saw a remarkable transformation, with the new three electric vehicles, lithium batteries, and solar panels becoming the backbone of export growth. Now, China's Ministry of Science and Technology says we are seeing the new three, marking another upgrade in the country's industrial landscape. They are artificial intelligence, robotics, and innovative drugs. With the evolution from the O3 to the new three, one thing is clear. China is relentlessly establishing itself as a global tech innovation superpower. In this edition of the program, we explore the implication of the emergence of the new three and how far China can go in strengthening its technological and scientific power. To listen to this episode again or to catch up on our previous episodes, you can download our podcast by searching World Today. So joining us now on the line are Xiao Qian, Deputy Director of the Center for International Security and Strategy, Tsinghua University; Kashif Sharif, Associate Professor from School of Computer Science and Technology, Beijing Institute of Technology; and Andy Mauck, author of the book The Innovation Machine: How China Creates and Adapts Technology Through Governance, and a professor with Beijing Foreign Studies University. So, thank you very much for joining us, Andy, Dr. Xiao, and Professor Sharif. Dr. Xiao, to start with you, when we talk about the emergence of China's new three electric vehicles, lithium batteries, solar panels, as compared to the O3 apparel, furniture, and home appliances, an argument we used to make is that they signaled a shift from labor-intensive industries to technology-driven or technology-intensive manufacturing in the Chinese economy. Now, in comparison with the new three, what do you think is really new about the new three of artificial intelligence, robotics, and innovative drugs?
Thank you. Thank you for having me in this panel. I think this is a very interesting question. The new three actually represent another stage in China's industrial upgrading. If the new three demonstrated China's ability to combine technological innovation with advanced manufacturing at scale, the new three are even more knowledge-intensive and innovation-driven. They actually rely much more heavily on frontier scientific research, also highly skilled talent, original technological breakthroughs, and also interdisciplinary collaboration. So their competitiveness depends less on manufacturing scale alone and more on the ability to generate new knowledge and translate it into real-world applications. So another important factor is the policy direction. I think in recent years, the Chinese government has placed increasing emphasis on AI plus, life sciences, and also biotechnology as strategic priorities. So through all these investments in research, talent development, and innovation ecosystems, it has created a more supportive environment for these sectors to grow and also commercialize new technologies. So back to your question, if the new three reflected China's emergence as a global manufacturing powerhouse, I think the new three increasingly reflect China's ambition to become a global technology and innovation powerhouse.
Professor Sharif, going to you, more specifically in the first half of 2026, China exported robotics to more than 140 countries and regions across the globe. And in some certain specific categories, exports of high-end surgical robots, for example, saw a 3.3-fold surge year on year. How much would you attribute China's lead in robotics to the country's manufacturing scale, and how much to the country's innovation capabilities?
Thank you for having me. I think we need to have a fine definition of what we call scale and innovation. The idea that manufacturing scale and innovation can be separated is not that simple. For example, in robotics, manufacturing itself has become part of the innovation process. So China's manufacturing scale provides fundamentally three important advantages. First, it creates a very dense supplier network for different components like motors, sensors, batteries, precision components, machine vision systems, etc. So a robotics company can redesign a component and test a new version much faster when the suppliers are close by. Secondly, China has an enormous variety of deployment scenarios, factories, warehouses, hospitals, farms, ports, airports, other logistical networks. So every real deployment generates information about failures, reliability, energy use, the human-machine interaction. So the operational feedback becomes research data itself. And then thirdly, the large production volumes reduce the component costs. This allows companies to experiment more and experiment more aggressively and to place robots in those environments where they were previously too expensive to put in. So scale alone would only produce inexpensive robots. It cannot by itself produce accurate surgical systems or reliable industrial systems or intelligent humanoids. These requires innovation at the fundamental level, at the control theory, at the mechanical design, at the embodied AI in itself. So the rapid growth of surgical robot exports is particularly significant because surgical systems must meet much higher requirements for precision, reliability, and certification than ordinary consumer robots. So China's advantage, therefore, is not simply mass manufacturing. It is what we should call innovation through manufacturing. Research, engineering, production, deployment all occur in a tightly connected loop. So the next challenge is to move from the robots that perform impressive demonstrations to robots that can, let's say, operate safely and economically for not a specific set of industries or specific set of companies, but for thousands of hours in unpredictable environments. So China's scale gives it a powerful platform, and then reliability, intelligence, and trust will further determine whether the platform produces lasting global leadership.
Andy, turning to you, when we talk about Chinese AI models, of course, nowadays they are gaining ground across the world because they are affordable, because they are open sourced, because they're increasingly intelligent as well. Goldman Sachs wrote in a July research report that Chinese AI models are reaching a critical stage for wide adoption. So, in your understanding, what factors could sustain a wide global adoption of Chinese AI models?
Well, Ding Heng, I think we first have to understand the environment in which AI is developed and diffused in two key markets, because in reality, there are only two centers for AI innovation in the world. So China is one, of course, and the United States. And when we look at what drives innovation in the United States, it's driven by private sector companies that are looking to maximize capital market valuations. So to put it bluntly, to make as much money as quickly as possible. Whereas in China, there are, of course, private companies that strive to make money. But at the same time, it occurs in a larger system that is guided and led by the government. And the Chinese government has been very clear that AI is to be a global public good to serve as many people as possible. So I think this is one of the reasons we've seen almost all of the major AI players in China rely on open source approach because there's a competitive strategy reason for this. First of all, the frontier of large language models is still largely dominated by the American private companies. So if you're a Chinese player and you want to make your mark in the global marketplace, you need a strategy that can deal with that. And of course, open source generally is free, so it's hard to compete with free. So at a corporate strategy level, this is a very smart thing to do. But again, it also aligns with China's overall national objective. And we could even say its vision for the world is that AI should be a global public good and not used as a source of extracting economic rent.
Dr. Xiao Qian, in terms of the humanoid robots industry, which is highly relevant with both the robotics and artificial intelligence, in this field, China currently boasts more than 140 manufacturers and a rapidly expanding supply chain for sure. Last year, Chinese companies accounted for 90% of worldwide shipments of humanoid robots. And interestingly, the US government has just banned new humanoid robot imports from foreign manufacturers on the grounds of national security. In your opinion, do Chinese humanoid robots pose any risk to any country's national security?
Okay, this is a very interesting question, but I would rather like to begin with a bigger picture. The US recent restriction on imports of advanced humanoid robots and also power inverters from China are officially justified as a measure to reduce cybersecurity and also the supply disruption risks facing AI infrastructure and critical supply chains. However, at the deeper level, I think this policy still reflects the trend that the US has been intensifying in recent years, that is, securitize technology and also protect the domestic industries. Humanoid robots are often seen as an important vehicle for extending AI into the physical world. They are posed to become the critical infrastructure in future smart manufacturing, logistics, home services, and also other fields, and have already emerged as a new arena in global AI competition. So as a result, the US has increasingly tended to treat these products as strategically significant key technologies rather than mere consumer goods. So we can see that over the past few years, the US has maintained a lead in large language models, but in the industrialization of humanoid robots, Chinese companies leveraging their complete manufacturing systems, supply chain advantages, and also rich application scenarios have developed significantly faster. So the US government has begun to worry that a large influx of Chinese robots with their prices and also industrial advantages into the American market would not only affect the development of domestic robotics industries, but also potentially weaken America's future competitive edge in embodied intelligence. So that is a very important reason that US impose restrictions on these areas, and they clearly involve industrial competition factors. What the US fears most, as I see here, is losing the dominant position in this area. In the past, the US focused more on AI's brain, that is large language models. The competition has now extended to complete intelligent systems that combine brain and body. So it is precisely in robotics manufacturing, supply chains, and also application deployment that China holds some advantages, which is an important background to the US expanding export controls and also import restrictions. But going forward, I think countries should work together to develop some common standards for safety or for cybersecurity and the trustworthy deployment of humanoid robots that would do more to address genuine security concerns than solely relying on trade restrictions.
Professor Sharif, talking about innovative pharmaceutical products, in 2025, Overseas licensing deals involving innovative Chinese drugs reached 137.7 billion US dollars. That's 10 times the 2021 level. And in the first 6 months of this year, Chinese companies accounted for 8 out of the world's top 10 pharmaceutical licensing deals. So, in a bigger picture sense, why do you think China is now emerging as a global biotechnology innovation hub?
I think this also ties back to the overall ecosystem. China's emerging advantage in the biotechnology is not based on one single breakthrough. It comes from building a highly efficient system for translating scientific ideas into clinical assets, I would call them. China has a substantial pool of scientists trained in the basic things like molecular biology, chemistry, medicine, data science, pharmaceutical engineering, etc. Many of them have actual international research and industry experience also. So around them, China has developed a dense ecosystem of biotechnology startups, new hospitals, contracted research organizations, and then advanced manufacturers. So this all creates speed. If we take an example of a simple promising molecule that may deliver some product at the end, it can move from the laboratory to research or lab research to preclinical trials very quickly. So the clinical development through an increasingly integrated domestic networks is basically the leverage China has. Large and diverse patient population also plays very effectively in all of this ecosystem. It can support clinical development, and then the further next step would be the international trials that needs global approval and coordination, and which is an indicator why outside organizations want these products or research basics from China. At the same time, regulatory reforms in China and the competition among Chinese biotechnology companies have further accelerated this development. Companies cannot survive alone by copying already developed medicines. They need the differentiated drug targets, delivery mechanics, or different treatment combinations. So global pharmaceutical companies realize this, and then they are licensing Chinese assets because they see the scientific and commercial value in these pipelines. So in a nutshell, China's strongest competitive product may therefore not be a single medicine, as I said. It may be the ability to compress the journey from scientific discovery to a clinically testable asset. And then the next stage would be to have deeper basic science, stronger global clinical evidence, and internationally trusted intellectual property protection, and more experience in the global commercialization, which we can see through these different deals that are going on in the investment in the biotechnology domain.
Okay. Now, actually, according to a recent report issued by this UK-based analytical and consulting company known as Global Data, China's biotech innovation power has become a source of strategic concern in the United States or in Washington. But in the meantime, the report says geopolitical uncertainty is unlikely to affect China's long-term trajectory as one of the world's leading sources of biopharmaceutical innovation. The report also notes that commercial-level biotech cooperation between U.S. and Chinese companies remains intact despite the current, say, geopolitical or political rivalry or tension between Beijing and Washington. So, Andy, how would you look at this report's assessment?
Well, Ding Heng, I think, first of all, it's important to understand the American worldview. From the U.S. perspective, it wants to be number one, the global hegemon, but at the same time, it has extreme casualty aversion, meaning that, it cannot afford, because of its political system, to have wounded, dead American soldiers on television, on social media. So how does it then address this problem? By maintaining technological superiority. And I think this is exactly why the US is responding the way it is, whether we're looking at NVIDIA GPUs, whether we're looking at large language models, or even advanced innovative pharmaceuticals, because again, all of this is technology. So I think this is driving a lot of this behavior. And as Professor Xiao mentioned, I think the word she used was securitization. I would say it's actually more weaponization. And then if we look then at, how's this going to affect China? I think in the long term, not at all, only to accelerate China's technological advances on all fronts. And we only have to look at, say, Huawei. When Huawei was put on the entity list, it had a devastating impact on its business at the time. But at the same time, it opened new avenues for development, corporate and technological development. Huawei's bounced back stronger than ever. It's now a leader in the hardware side of artificial intelligence. So I think that this is what's happening. And I just want to briefly say, Ding Heng, that whether we're talking about innovative pharmaceuticals, smart robots, electric vehicles, I think what unites all this is what in my book I call the I-5 model, which does for governance what Michael Porter, the Harvard Business School professor, with his 5 forces model did for corporate strategy, meaning that it allows investors, government officials, academics to specifically focus on what part of governance is most effective at turning an idea, say environmental sustainability through electric vehicles, to institutions, to instruments or policies, to infrastructure, and then finally to impact. And I think what we've seen is China's ability to, through the lens of this model, effectively transmit ideas to institutions, have those institutions formulate and manage effective instruments, which then create both the physical infrastructure as well as the intangible infrastructure that turns into ultimately national capability. And I think what we're witnessing right now is the integration of artificial intelligence and robotics, where we will be in a world of smart robots, perhaps numbering in the billions. And again, this requires, as Professor Sharif said, not just research, but industrial scale and the ability to integrate the two, perhaps in this sort of recursive manufacturing innovative loop where you make robots to make even smarter robots to make even smarter robots.
Actually, in terms of the foreign trade of China, an old pattern we have been seeing for a long time is that China runs a surplus for trade in goods, but a deficit for trade in services. And now that pattern is changing as well. From January to May this year, China's services trade deficit narrowed by 20%, and exports of knowledge-intensive services surged by more than 12%. So, Dr. Xiao Qian, briefly before we are to take a short break, what do you think is the correlation between the growth of China's services exports and the rise of the new three?
This is a very good question. You mentioned the pattern change, but I really believe that we still need more time to make that observation. I do think there's a strong correlation here because, as I mentioned earlier, the new three are much more knowledge intensive and innovation driven than previous generations of industries. So their value creation is no longer limited to manufacturing physical products. It increasingly comes from software, algorithms, R&D, engineering services, and also digital solutions. So as these industries grow, they naturally drive the export of knowledge-intensive services, including AI services, cloud computing, software development, technical consulting, and also research collaboration. In other words, China is exporting not only products, but also technology, innovation, and expertise. So this is an important sign of China's economic upgrading. it suggests that China's international competitiveness is increasingly based not only on manufacturing capacity, but also on knowledge creation and technological innovation. But we still need more time to make that, to make it as a pattern change.
Yeah, the pattern change could be gradual and incremental. But thank you very much. That's all for the first half of our discussion today. Coming back, our discussion will continue. Stay tuned. You're back with World Today. I'm Ding Heng in Beijing. Today we are talking about how AI, robotics, and innovative drugs are marking a new industrial upgrade in China, as well as China's ambition to become a global tech power. Joining our discussion, Xiao Qian, Deputy Director of the Center for International Security and Strategy, Tsinghua University. Kashif Sharif, Associate Professor from School of Computer Science and Technology, Beijing Institute of Technology. Andy Malk, author of the book The Innovation Machine: How China Creates and Adopts Technology Through Governance. Professor Sharif, going back to you, China used to serve as a destination for the manufacturing industries that were relocated out of the advanced countries or economies. Therefore, many industrial standards were set by others and followed by China at the time. That was especially the case during the era of the so-called O3. Now was the rise of the new 3. What do you make of China's role in terms of setting global industrial standards?
Oh, okay, so there is no doubt that China is moving from being primarily a standards follower to becoming a standards contributor, and I would say in some sectors it's the agenda sector also. Another thing that we need to be clear is that market size alone will not translate to global standards. Fundamentally, if we go to the basics, there are two ways standards emerge. The first is through market adoption, when millions of devices use the same interface or protocol or specifications, they become de facto standards. So China's manufacturing and market scale provides a considerable influence at this level. And from the second perspective, it is through formal international organizations where governments, researchers, frontier labs, and companies negotiate common technical requirements. And at this level, China's growing scientific and industrial capacity gives it more expertise to contribute to these processes. So from both perspectives, China has now gained the capability to actually write these standards. But perhaps there is another important element in there, and that is of the trust. Especially in AI and robotics and biotechnology standards, these standards are not just component dimensions or communication formats. They all concern about the safety, the security that we were just talking about, the data governance, who's providing the updates, where they are coming from, model evaluation, clinical evidence, and so on. So the trust has to be between the standard creator and as well as the standard follower. And this is why China seeks to create standards that are open, interoperable, and they can be independently tested. So a standard should make it easier for foreign companies to build compatible products, not force them into a closed ecosystem controlled by one supplier, which we usually see, especially in the case of these frontier labs of AI, coming out of the US, that they want that the user should just use what they provide, not really be able to modify or localize it or use it in other ways that they feel is not the right way to use it. And China is doing the opposite, which actually allows other companies, even local governments, to use those AI models in whatever way they feel fits best for their needs. So I think it's not only that the standards set by a governing body will be important. I think the trust will make some of these standards the de facto go-to points for many of the companies as well as the governments.
Between the year 2007 and 2023, China's spending on research and development jumped by 475%, placing China just behind the United States in R&D spending. And last year, China's R&D spending intensity reached 2.8%, surpassing the average of OECD economies for the first time. So, Dr. Xiao Qian, over the long term, what do you think can sustain the growth of China's R&D spending? I mean, is it simply a matter of political will or policy direction?
Yeah, political will is certainly an important part of the story. We know the Chinese leadership has constantly viewed investment in science and technology as a long-term strategic priority and as a key driver for future economic growth. So that policy continuity provides confidence for both public and private investment. But I don't think political will alone explains the sustained growth in China's R&D spending. It is supported by a much broader innovation ecosystem, and I heard previous panelists also discuss. In the past 2 decades, China has significantly expanded its higher education system, strengthened its research institutions, and also invested heavily in talent development. So many Chinese universities, including my own university, have improved their global standing and are producing and at the same time attracting a growing number of highly skilled researchers and engineers. At the same time, there's a strong demand from the industry as well. Chinese companies are competing increasingly technology-intensive sectors, which creates incentives for continuous investment in innovation. So in other words, government support, universities, industry, and the talent reinforce one another. So I see China's R&D growth as being driven not simply by political will, but by the development of a more mature innovation ecosystem. As long as that ecosystem continues to generate talent, encourage research, and translate discoveries into commercial applications, I believe China's investment in R&D will remain strong over the long term.
So, Andy, for quite some time, I guess over the past 1 decade or so, we have heard this observation that China's sweet spot is on tweaking certain moderately difficult technologies and improving them incrementally, and then selling them in massive amounts at lower margins, at lower prices. But when it comes to the most advanced, the most complex technologies, China's playbook in the economies of scale works less well. Do you think this observation still holds true for China today?
Ding Heng, I don't. And this reflection of this view makes me think back when I was working as a venture capitalist in Beijing, God, more than 20 years ago. And at the time, it was very common to say that China cannot innovate. And the term C to C was not consumer to consumer or peer to peer. It was copy to China, meaning that what was considered innovation was say, let's go build the Google of China. Let's go build the eBay of China. And again, at the time, I thought that was a profound misunderstanding of China's capabilities. And I think, this pattern fits what we're talking about right now, in that the economically, and I would say politically rational thing to do is, when you're at a more developmental stage, is exactly as you're saying, take something that already exists, improve it, produce it at scale. But from a microeconomic theory perspective, what we can say is China was, or maybe still is in some ways, not at the production possibilities frontier in some areas. But where it is, then the only way forward is through technological breakthroughs. And I would share a quick anecdote here. We're talking about AI earlier, that when DeepSeek first came out last year, many people said, oh, this was a response to hardware constraints, which in some sense we can say is true. But at the same time, because they also released the technical paper, and it showed that, in fact, maybe not deep theoretical breakthroughs, but certainly important technological breakthroughs, even to the point where someone like Mark Andreessen, who was the person that developed the first browser that became Netscape and now is a top venture capitalist in Silicon Valley, wrote, I think it was in the Wall Street Journal, said this is the greatest contribution to mankind. And this is from someone who, in recent years has been quite negative about China. So I'm not so sure it was ever true that China cannot innovate at the frontier. But, again, I think we have to look at what is rational from an economic and political perspective. I do feel confident in saying that we will see much more frontier innovation from China, not just, again, because as it reaches the frontier in different sectors, but there's a flywheel effect. So China, of course, has an enormous STEM base of talent, science, technology, engineering, mathematics. It has big markets, as we heard Professor Xiao say, government support. But what happens is you start to reach a critical mass where the smartest people in the world want to work with the other smartest people in the world. And increasingly, more and more of those are in China. And you also want to work on the most interesting and the hardest problems. And again, increasingly, this is in China. So I think we're really starting to see this flywheel spin. And as it spins faster and faster. So I think, we can look forward to some, I think, pretty exciting things in technology in the coming years.
Yeah, so since Andy talked about the smartest people working for other group of smartest people, let's indeed talk about the cultivation of talent. I guess that's a very, very important aspect for China to become a global tech superpower. Professor Sharif, as China looks to achieve self-reliance in science and technology and establish itself as a global innovation superpower, how can China's education system keep pace with this trend and nurture more bright minds? A couple of years ago, Wang Xingxing, who is the founder of China's robotics industry leading player Unitary Robotics, once had a sharp critic of China's education, saying that knowledge learned in school is often outdated. Does he have a point?
Well, Wang Xingxing does have a point, but I would not look at it in the same light. Knowledge taught in universities will always lag behind the newest tools, the technologies that we innovate. So a university cannot redesign an entire degree every time a new AI model comes out or a new programming framework or a new robotic platform appears. So the real problem is not that some knowledge has become outdated. It is whether the students have acquired the ability to update themselves or not. So, for example, in my field, in computer science and robotics, especially software tools may change within 2 or 3 years. New languages emerge. But the fundamental mathematics, the algorithms, the control theory, the computer architecture, the fundamental physics and system thinking are still the same. So a student who understands only the latest tools may become obsolete very quickly as soon as the tool changes. But a student with strong foundations can learn the next tool quickly. So universities should therefore combine durable foundations with much quicker, faster exposure to the current practices. So courses can include, let's say, open source projects, industrial case studies, research problems, lab or use of labs using modern platforms. Similarly, industry experts from the latest fields can co-teach selected modules, or students should work on problems for which solution is not already written in the textbook. At the same time, the universities should not wait 5 or 6 years to revise a course or the curriculum for a degree. Individual modules, lab exercises, simple projects can be updated every year, every semester. So the fundamentals remain the same. But on top of that, they can add modules when things change. At the same time, faculty development becomes equally important. We cannot expect students to engage with latest technology or tool if the teacher does not know or has no opportunity, or I would say even the incentive to renew their knowledge through reading or research or industrial collaboration or professional training. At the same time, the university should not also become a short-term vocational center. Their role is not merely to train students to operate today's machine. Their job is to prepare them to build tomorrow's technology. So yeah, criticism is serious. It is there, but the solution is not to chase every new tool. It is to teach the strong foundations and then inculcate the intellectual curiosity and rapid learning in the students. So whenever the tool changes, they can easily adapt and upgrade them. And that is, I think, the objective of the universities that we should focus on.
Professor Sharif, I guess I must ask this question to you regarding the quality of China's STEM education. I mean, university faculties like you, yourself, are both teachers and researchers. And some say Chinese universities' existing faculty assessment system, especially those within the prestigious universities, are placing less emphasis on teaching and more on research results. Would you agree? And how can university faculties strike a better balance between doing research and providing quality STEM education to their students? Do you encounter those headaches yourself?
Yes, to a great extent. But I think the first principle should be that the universities must optimize the interfaces between the disciplines, not just create more disciplines for the sake of interdisciplinary research, but align the disciplines so that can interact more easily. AI, robotics, biotechnology, they're all inherently interdisciplinary. A humanoid robot may require mechanical engineering. It also requires electronics. It also requires computer science, control theory, material sciences. At some level, the psychology and ethics of human interaction. So simply establishing a new robotics major or robotics degree does not guarantee that all these areas will actually interact. So I think in simple terms, we can have the education, a 4-year degree divided into, let's say, 3 layers for the sake of simplicity. So the first layer allows the strong foundations, mathematics, computing, scientific reasoning, the basics that they require to be able to critically analyze anything. And then we can have a second layer that should consist of flexible modules that students can combine across traditional departments. For example, a CS or a computer science student might study control systems also, or biomedical sensing also. And at the same time, a mechanical engineering student can study machine learning or cybersecurity to be at least aware of what they are. We used to have this system of major and minor when I was doing my studies, and that had that kind of diversity, but it does not create that interfacing. So the third layer should be the mission-driven projects. Students from different disciplines work together on a real problem. So that is the thing that will allow them to become more integrated. Universities can have shared labs, joint faculty appointments, all those kind of things to actually facilitate it also. Industry participation in the curricular development, that can all facilitate this interaction. So the bottom line is just merely aligning new degrees with the latest acronyms or technology names is not sufficient. We should be able to have the capability where multiple departments within a school or a university can easily interact with each other. They should not exist in isolation and this is mine, that is their departments. That mentality has to go away. Funding should be available for interdisciplinary research, which I have seen that is increasing by NSFC in China also and many other organizations. So I think China is going in the right direction as far as the interfacing is concerned.
Dr. Xiao Qian, let me get your take on this. We know China is currently implementing a 3-year action plan to optimize the structure of academic disciplines in higher education institutions. Some of the plan's proposed measures include setting up academic programs targeting strategic, emerging, and future industries, supporting the development of basic disciplines, and encouraging interdisciplinary studies. So, in your opinion, how can Chinese universities, especially the elite institutions, optimize their STEM education?
Well, this is a good question. I think the direction is the right one because emerging industries such as AI, robotics, and biotechnology are increasingly interdisciplinary, as mentioned by Professor Sharif. They require people who can work across computer science, engineering, life sciences, and even the social sciences. So universities need to move beyond the traditional disciplinary boundaries. At the same time, we should not overlook the importance of basic disciplines. We should not overlook the importance of basic disciplines. Many of today's breakthroughs in AI, robotics, and innovative drugs are built on decades of fundamental research in mathematics, physics, biology, and computer science. And future-oriented education should strengthen both basic research and also interdisciplinary innovation. So finally, I think universities also have to stay closely connected with industry. New technologies evolve so rapidly that students should have more opportunities to participate in real research projects, internships, and also collaborations with companies. That helps them understand not only scientific frontiers, but also real-world challenges. So in this respect, I would like to give credit to Tsinghua University because many leading entrepreneurs in China's AI and semiconductor industries, including Yang Zhilin of Moonshot AI, actually graduated from Tsinghua. When I listened to their interviews, what standed out is not what they learned every technology in the classroom, but that the university gave them the freedom to explore, encouraged them to tackle difficult problems, and fostered an entrepreneur mindset. So ultimately, I think the goal of education in university is not simply to produce graduates with today's knowledge, but lifelong learners who can create tomorrow's knowledge. I think that is also what universities should strive for this AI age.
Okay. By the way, Andy, when we talk about the bigger picture, to what extent do you think China's high-tech development translate into maintaining growth and a stronger macro economy?
Well, it absolutely is related, Ding Heng, right? Again, because if we see, these technological advances, it addresses an aging population, can increase productivity with less negative impact on the economy, all of these tangible things. But I think what is very impressive to me about what China is doing, and in particular, some people at Tsinghua, including Professor Xiao's colleague Xiao, right, in terms of researching AI governance, right? Because again, we think about these philosophical issues. China has, thousands of years of history, political experience, philosophy to say, how do we make, if we do get to, a artificial super intelligence or general intelligence, what values do we want these smart robots or these AI models to have, right? What principles should they operate by? And these are increasingly important questions that we see again places like Tsinghua, other places around China that are also addressing these questions. I also want to share a quick experience when I was at the WAIC. I was at a talk given by a senior scientist at the Beijing Academy for Artificial Intelligence. And he was not just working on a more advanced AI model, but developing a common data language for brain science and research. So, the problem is that, you have lots of different kinds of data when it comes to brain research, but they're not really in one integrated conceptual framework. And a very practical application of this is that you could then take signal output from an EEG and convert it into an equivalent signal from an fMRI. So basically a relatively inexpensive, commonly available equipment into a very expensive complex other piece of equipment. And if you're able to do something like that, think about the implications in the global south, right? Where many countries, many cities don't have the money or the expertise to have an fMRI to see, kind of the process of your brain. And these are the kind of questions that are really at a deeper, perhaps even more theoretical level that China is working on when it comes to AI, not just, the hardware layer, the model layer, the application layer.
Okay. China's efforts to secure self-reliance in science and technology are to a large extent, of course, driven by geopolitical issues, including China's relationship with the United States. But in the meantime, China has also made it very clear that it is committed to building a more open global innovation ecosystem. Dr. Xiao Qian, how would you look at these two missions? Can they go hand in hand with each other, and can they even reinforce each other?
Right. I don't think these two goals are contradictory. As you mentioned, I really believe they can reinforce each other. Self-reliance is about strengthening China's own innovation capabilities, including investing in basic research, developing talent, and also improving resilience in key technologies. It does not mean closing the door or pursuing technological isolation. Rather, I think it means having the capability to innovate independently while remaining an active participant in global scientific and technological cooperation. We all know that innovation has always been a global endeavor. Scientific breakthrough built on the exchange of ideas, international collaboration, and open research communities. I mean, no country, regardless of its technological strength, can solve all frontier challenges alone, whether in AI, biotechnology, or climate technology. So I see self-reliance and openness are actually, they serve different purposes. Self-reliance provides resilience and confidence, while openness accelerates innovation and creates opportunities for shared progress. So the two are not mutually exclusive. Together, they make innovation more sustainable. So ultimately, the goal should be to build an innovation ecosystem that is both resilient and open, strong enough to withstand external uncertainties, but open enough to continue contributing to global scientific progress.
Professor Sharif, your final thoughts briefly?
Okay, yeah, I totally agree with Professor Xiao Qian that they're not different. They kind of reinforce each other. But I would emphasize on the point that she also mentioned that self-reliance should not be translated into isolation. It should be understood in the terms of resilience. No major country can or should attempt to produce every scientific idea, every component, and every technology entirely by itself. Modern innovation depends on international research, global talent, specialized supply chains, and access to different markets. So what we have said in the whole talk today, I think if you want to just create a strategy, it would be that the minimum domestic capability in technology is essential, especially in the economic from an economic aspect also, as well as the national security that we talked about. Secondly, we need to diversify international relationships rather than replacing one dependency with another one. And then we need to have those open and interoperable standards between the Chinese technologies as well as the foreign technologies, and the partnerships that will create combined standards to begin with, as well as the continued international research and commercial collaboration in areas where risk can be properly managed. So I think open at the interfaces, but resilient at the foundations, that would be the key takeaway message.
Well, a big thank you to our panelists, Xiao Qian from Tsinghua University, Kashif Sharif from Beijing Institute of Technology, Andy Mock, author and a professor from Beijing Foreign Studies University. That's all the time for this edition of the program. I'm Ding Heng in Beijing. Thank you so much for listening. Bye for now.